Picture this. A woman in an emerald gown walks into Manhattan's most exclusive gala. Every conversation stops. Every camera turns. Her billionaire date kisses her in front of 500 witnesses while her ex-husband watches in horror. But 18 months earlier, this same woman was sobbing in a bathroom stall, holding divorce papers that would strip away everything she thought she owned. Her husband had chosen his 26-year-old mistress over 8 years of marriage. The settlement left her with almost nothing. Worse, he was systematically destroying her career, ensuring she could never rebuild. Then her mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. $200,000 in treatment costs. Her ex-husband's response when she begged for help? Not my problem anymore. That's when Madison Sterling made a choice. She wouldn't just survive his betrayal. She would turn it into his complete destruction. Tonight, you're going to hear how a broken woman became the most dangerous player in Manhattan's power game. How she infiltrated her ex-husband's biggest business deal. How she gathered evidence of embezzlement, sexual harassment, and corporate fraud. And how one night at a company gala, she didn't just get revenge, she got justice. This is the story of Madison Sterling, and it's about to begin. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine at the hottest event in Manhattan, and it burned down everything my ex-husband thought he owned. Picture this. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel on a crisp October evening. Crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen tears above a sea of designer gowns and $1,000 tuxedos. The scent of imported roses mixing with the sharp tang of aged champagne. 500 of New York's most powerful people gathered under one gilded roof, their conversations a symphony of whispered deals and barely contained ambition. This was the annual Cross Industries Gala, the kind of event that graced the society pages and determined who held real power in Manhattan's tech elite. Camera flashes erupted like paparazzi lightning, capturing every smile, every handshake, every carefully orchestrated moment of success. And there I was, Madison Sterling, walking through those mahogany doors in an emerald silk gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The fabric clung to my curves like liquid confidence, the color chosen specifically because it made my auburn hair look like fire in the chandelier light. Diamond earrings caught the glow from above, sending tiny rainbows across my décolletage. My makeup was flawless, my posture perfect, my smile serene as a Madonna. But 18 months earlier, I had been sobbing in a bathroom stall at Peterson, Blake & Associates. Mascara streaming down my cheeks like black tears, clutching divorce papers that would strip away everything I thought I knew about my life. I had been Madison Cross then, corporate wife and trophy accessory, a woman so thoroughly diminished that I barely cast a shadow. The transformation was complete. Tonight, every head turned as I entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips as 500 pairs of eyes tracked my movement across the marble floor. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. Is that Madison Cross? I thought she disappeared after the divorce. Who is that man with her? The man on my arm was James Blackwood, 41 years old and worth approximately $3.7 billion. Venture capitalist, real estate mogul, and my ex-husband's most feared competitor. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his silver-touched temples giving him an air of distinguished authority. When he smiled, which was rarely, it was the kind of smile that made grown CEOs reconsider their life choices. But tonight, he was smiling at me. Across the ballroom, frozen like a deer in headlights, stood Ethan Cross, my ex-husband, the man who had once told me I was nothing without him. CEO of Cross Industries, the company that bore his name and fed his massive ego. He was 42 now, still handsome in that polished Wall Street way, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced for cameras and investors alike. Clinging to his arm like a life preserver was Bree Collins, 26 years old with platinum blonde hair and the kind of hungry ambition that glowed brighter than her sequined red dress. She was the reason our marriage had imploded, the mistress he had chosen over 8 years of partnership. Tonight, she looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Ethan's face had gone completely pale, his champagne glass trembling in his grip. For 5 seconds, maybe 10, we stared at each other across the crowded ballroom. In that moment, I saw everything he was thinking. Shock, fear, calculation. And underneath it all, the dawning realization that tonight was not going to go according to his carefully laid plans. But let me back up. Because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about resurrection. It's about what happens when you discover that the person you trusted most in the world has been systematically destroying you, piece by piece, smile by smile, lie by lie. It's about the moment you realize that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to become someone you never thought you could be. Someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than the woman who used to apologize for taking up space. It's about learning that the most lethal weapon in any woman's arsenal isn't anger or hatred. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. My name is Madison Sterling, and this is the story of how I went from broken wife to boardroom queen, how I discovered that my greatest weakness became my greatest strength, how I learned to play chess while my opponents were still playing checkers, and how one night at a company gala, I didn't just get my life back, I got my power back. The night was young, the champagne was flowing, and Ethan Cross was about to learn that divorcing me was the biggest mistake of his considerably charmed life. 5 years and 3 months earlier, I thought I had cracked the code of American success. Madison Cross, Esquire. The name looked perfect on business cards, sounded authoritative in conference rooms, and opened doors throughout Manhattan's legal elite. I was 32 years old with a corner office on the 42nd floor of Peterson, Blake & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious corporate law firms. My six-figure salary was supplemented by bonuses that could buy luxury cars, and my success rate in merger negotiations was legendary among my peers. I lived in a 3,000-square-foot penthouse on the Upper East Side, the kind of apartment featured in Architectural Digest, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The kitchen had marble countertops imported from Italy. The bathroom featured a soaking tub carved from a single piece of Carrara marble, and the living room could comfortably seat 20 people for the dinner parties that had become my specialty. My husband was Ethan Cross, owner and CEO of Cross Industries, a tech company that specialized in data analytics for Fortune 500 corporations. When we met, his company employed 12 people in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. By our 5th anniversary, Cross Industries occupied 4 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan and employed over 300 people across 6 cities. We were the golden couple of New York's tech scene, young, attractive, successful, and seemingly unstoppable. Society photographers loved us. Business journalists quoted us. Other couples tried to copy our formula for success. The wedding had been everything a girl from Queens could dream of. 200 guests at the Plaza Hotel, the same venue where we would later hold the gala that changed everything. I wore a Vera Wang gown that cost more than my mother made in 6 months, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and a smile so radiant that the photographer captured it for the cover of Manhattan Bride magazine. Ethan looked like a movie star in his custom tuxedo, his vows bringing tears to half the congregation. "Madison," he had said, his voice carrying clearly through the flower-draped ballroom, "you make me want to be the man I see reflected in your eyes. You are my partner, my equal, my inspiration. With you beside me, I can conquer the world." The reception lasted until 3 in the morning. We danced to Frank Sinatra, fed each other cake while cameras flashed, and accepted congratulations from senators, tech moguls, and entertainment industry titans. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in the Maldives, staying in an overwater villa that cost $15,000 per night. For the first 3 years, marriage felt like an extension of our perfect courtship. Ethan's business grew exponentially, and my legal career flourished alongside it. I made partner at Peterson, Blake, becoming the youngest woman in the firm's 90-year history to achieve that distinction. We hosted dinner parties where Supreme Court justices debated tax policy with venture capitalists. We traveled to conferences in Barcelona, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo, always first class, always staying in suites. But success, I learned, has a way of revealing character rather than building it. The changes were subtle at first. Ethan started working later, claiming that rapid expansion required his constant attention. He would leave our bed before dawn and return after midnight, smelling like expensive cologne that I didn't recognize. When I asked about his schedule, he would flash that same charming smile that had won my heart and say, "Building an empire requires sacrifice, Madison. I thought you understood that better than anyone." The dinner parties continued, but I began noticing how his attention wandered during conversations. His eyes would follow the younger women in attendance, lingering on short skirts and low necklines. When other men spoke to me, he would appear at my side with a possessive hand on my lower back. But when I tried to join his business discussions, he would guide me away with phrases like, "This is boring technical stuff," or "Why don't you check on the catering?" Slowly, incrementally, I began to disappear from my own life. "You wouldn't understand the complexities of what I'm dealing with," became his standard response to my questions about work. "The tech industry moves too fast for traditional legal thinking. This is really more of a man's conversation. Maybe you should focus on what you do best." The confident attorney who had once negotiated $100 million mergers started doubting herself in grocery store checkout lines. I found myself apologizing for things that weren't my fault, staying quiet during conversations where I once would have dominated, second-guessing decisions I had been making successfully for years. When Ethan snapped at me for asking about his day, I wondered if I was being too needy. When he criticized my appearance before important events, I assumed he was trying to help me look my best. When he dismissed my opinions about his business strategy, I told myself he was protecting me from unnecessary stress. I had spent 8 years in law school and corporate practice, learning to identify manipulation and gaslighting in opposing counsel. But when it came from my husband, wrapped in charm and justified by success, I mistook it for love. The sex became infrequent, then mechanical, then non-existent. When I tried to initiate intimacy, Ethan would claim exhaustion from work stress. When I suggested counseling, he laughed and said our marriage was fine. I was just being insecure. When I pointed out that we hadn't made love in 3 months, he accused me of keeping score like an accountant. "Madison," he said one evening, as I sat across from him at our 12-person dining table, "successful marriages require understanding. I'm building something bigger than both of us. I need a wife who supports that vision, not one who undermines it with constant complaints." I believed him. I told myself this was normal, the price of being married to an ambitious man. I threw myself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting flawless dinner parties, accompanying him to industry events, smiling for cameras while slowly erasing myself from the picture. But erasure, I would learn, was only the beginning. What came next was systematic destruction, and it started with a strategy session that wasn't really a strategy session at all. The crack in my perfect life appeared on our 5th wedding anniversary, October 15th, 2018. I had spent weeks planning the evening. Reservations at Daniel, our favorite restaurant where Ethan had proposed 3 years earlier. I had purchased a new dress from Bergdorf Goodman, a midnight blue silk creation that hugged my curves and made my eyes look like sapphires. My hair appointment at the Frederick Fekkai Salon had cost $400, resulting in auburn waves that cascaded down my back like liquid copper. I had even splurged on the Louboutin heels that Ethan had once admired in a Vogue spread, the red soles peeking from beneath my hem like a secret promise. I was excited in a way I hadn't been for months. This would be our chance to reconnect, to remember why we had fallen in love, to rebuild the intimacy that had been slowly eroding under the weight of his success and my growing invisibility. The table at Daniel was perfect, tucked into an alcove with soft lighting and a view of the restaurant's famous dining room. I arrived early, ordered a glass of the Sancerre we had shared on our first date, and checked my appearance in my compact mirror. My makeup was flawless, my smile genuine for the first time in weeks. At 6:30, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Sorry, babe, emergency strategy session with the board. Rain check? Love you." I stared at the message for a full minute, my champagne flute halfway to my lips. Other couples celebrated around me while the maître d' approached with the concerned expression of someone who had witnessed many romantic disappointments. "Madame Cross, will Monsieur be joining you this evening?" "He's been delayed," I heard myself say. "Perhaps I could wait at the bar." I spent 2 hours at that bar, nursing glasses of wine and making increasingly elaborate excuses to the staff. Business emergency, important client, the demands of running a growing company. I had become expert at explaining away Ethan's absences, at making his neglect sound like noble sacrifice. Other couples celebrated anniversaries around me. I watched a man present his wife with a small velvet box, saw her face light up with genuine surprise and joy. I watched another couple hold hands across their table, lost in conversation that required no interruption from phones or business concerns. At 8:45, I finally admitted defeat and called an Uber home. But as I sat in the back seat, something nagged at me. Emergency strategy session with the board. On our anniversary, at 7 in the evening on a Friday night. Then I remembered something that should have occurred to me immediately. Ethan and I shared a digital calendar for social events and important dates. The app synced our schedules automatically, ensuring we never double-booked dinners or missed each other's important meetings. I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar application, my finger trembling slightly as I navigated to today's date. There it was, scheduled from 7 to 10 p.m. Strategy session with BC Bree Collins, the bubbly blonde marketing coordinator who had joined Cross Industries 6 months earlier, fresh out of Wharton's MBA program, with legs that seemed to go on forever, and a laugh that made every man in the room forget they were married. She was 26 years old, ambitious in the way that only comes from never having been told you can't have everything you want, and blessed with the kind of natural beauty that required very little maintenance. I had met her at several company events, always hanging on Ethan's words during presentations, always the first to laugh at his jokes, always positioning herself in his line of sight during meetings. When I mentioned her obvious attraction to my husband, Ethan had laughed and called me paranoid. "Bree is young and eager," he had said. "She reminds me of myself at that age. Pure ambition and determination. If you see something inappropriate in mentorship, maybe the problem isn't her behavior." But emergency strategy sessions didn't typically take place at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. I had the Uber driver change destinations. 20 minutes later, I sat in the parking garage of one of Manhattan's most exclusive hotels, my anniversary dress wrinkled from the car ride, my carefully styled hair beginning to fall from its pins. The rational part of my brain insisted there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps they were meeting clients there. Perhaps the hotel had conference facilities that were more convenient than the office. Perhaps I was being exactly as paranoid as Ethan claimed. But the woman in me, the wife who had been feeling increasingly invisible for months, knew better. I waited in that parking garage for 2 hours and 13 minutes, watching the elevator doors with the intensity of a private investigator. Other hotel guests came and went, couples dressed for romantic dinners, business travelers wheeling luggage toward the elevators, tourists consulting guidebooks and speaking in foreign languages. At 9:47, the elevator doors opened and my world ended. Ethan emerged first, his hair mussed in a way that had nothing to do with business meetings. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and there was a satisfied expression on his face that I hadn't seen in months. He was holding the hand of Bree Collins, whose lipstick had been completely kissed away and whose blazer was wrinkled beyond any hope of explanation. They were laughing about something, their heads close together in the intimate way of lovers sharing secrets. Ethan's free hand rested on the small of her back, a gesture I recognized from our own early courtship. They looked happy, relaxed, completely absorbed in each other. They looked like a couple. I watched my husband of 5 years kiss another woman under the golden lights of the hotel's entrance, soft and lingering and full of emotion that he hadn't shown me in over a year. I watched him open the door of his Tesla for her, wait while she settled into the passenger seat, then walk around to the driver's side with the spring in his step that success and satisfaction bring. They drove away together, leaving me sitting in my car in a hotel parking garage, still wearing the anniversary dress I had bought to seduce my own husband. Something inside me died that night. Not love necessarily, but the last vestige of the woman who believed that if she just tried harder, loved more selflessly, supported more completely, she could save her marriage. When Ethan arrived home at 11:47, I was waiting in our living room, still wearing the dress but having removed the expensive shoes that had begun to pinch hours earlier. I had poured myself a large glass of the wine we had received as a wedding gift, a bottle of Chateau Margaux that we had been saving for a special occasion. "How was your emergency meeting?" I asked quietly. He didn't even have the grace to look guilty, just annoyed like I was interrupting important thoughts with trivial questions. "Fine. Complex negotiations with a potential client. Very technical stuff. You wouldn't understand the details." "At the Mandarin Oriental?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I watched his face carefully, looking for tells the way I had been trained to read opposing counsel during negotiations. The slight tightening around his eyes. The almost imperceptible pause before answering. The way his hand moved unconsciously to straighten a tie that was already perfectly aligned. The client preferred a neutral venue. Some executives are superstitious about making deals in our offices. It was a good lie, delivered with the kind of confidence that had made him successful in business. But I was a lawyer, and I knew when someone was perjuring themselves. "Ethan," I said, setting down my wine glass with deliberate care, "I need to ask you a direct question. and I need you to give me an honest answer. Are you having an affair with Bree Collins? The silence that followed was answer enough. It stretched between us like a chasm, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Ethan sighed and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I had once found endearing, but now recognized as a tell when he was calculating his next move. Madison, you're being paranoid again. Bree is a talented employee with excellent instincts for marketing strategy. We work well together professionally. If you can't handle that I have female colleagues, maybe the problem isn't my behavior. It was masterful, really, the way he turned my legitimate concern into evidence of my personal failings. He made me the problem for asking questions about behavior that would have been suspicious to anyone with functioning eyes. But I wasn't going to be gaslighted again. Not tonight. I saw you, I said simply, at the Mandarin Oriental. I saw you kiss her. For the first time in our conversation, Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Not guilty, not ashamed, but surprised that he had been caught. So you followed me, he said finally. You hired someone to spy on me. I didn't hire anyone. I went to the hotel myself. Even worse, my own wife stalking me like some kind of obsessed ex-girlfriend. Again, he was making me the villain in this story. I was the one behaving inappropriately by discovering his affair. Ethan, I said, standing up from the couch with as much dignity as I could muster, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you having an affair with Bree Collins? He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then something shifted in his face, and I saw a coldness there that I had never seen before. Yes, he said simply. I am. Non-racial. The confession should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief, like finally putting down a heavy suitcase I had been carrying for months. How long? I asked. Ethan poured himself 3 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter on our bar cart, taking his time with the ritual. When he finally looked at me, his expression was calm, almost clinical. 4 months, since the tech conference in San Francisco. 4 months. While I had been planning surprise dinners and buying lingerie and trying to understand why my husband seemed increasingly distant, he had been building a relationship with another woman. Do you love her? The question surprised both of us. It wasn't what a wronged wife was supposed to ask. I should have been screaming, throwing things, demanding explanations. Instead, I found myself genuinely curious about the logistics of his betrayal. Ethan took a long sip of scotch before answering. Yes, I do. The admission hung between us like a blade. Not just sex, not just an affair, but love. Real emotion invested in someone who wasn't me. And us? I asked. Do you love me? This pause was longer, more telling. Madison, we've grown apart. You have to see that. We want different things now. What do I want that's so different from what you want? You want the old Ethan? The man who needed you to build his confidence, who relied on your advice for business decisions, who made you feel essential to his success? His voice was getting stronger, more confident, as if he had been rehearsing this speech. But I'm not that man anymore. I've outgrown needing someone to validate my decisions or boost my ego. The words were like physical blows. So I'm obsolete. You're stuck in the past. Bree sees me as I am now, not as who I used to be. She believes in my vision for the future, instead of trying to anchor me to old patterns. I stared at this man I had loved for 8 years, married for 5, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The Ethan I had fallen in love with was ambitious but kind, driven but considerate. This version was cold, calculating, utterly self-centered. What happens now? I asked. I want a divorce. The words were delivered without emotion, like a business transaction. I've already consulted with lawyers. My team thinks we can have this finalized within 6 months if you're reasonable about the settlement. Your team. He had been planning this for months while I was buying anniversary dresses. Reasonable how? The prenup is clear about assets acquired before our marriage. Cross Industries was established before we met, so the company remains entirely mine. The apartment was purchased with my earnings, so that stays with me as well. You'll receive alimony for 2 years, enough to establish yourself independently. I had helped build Cross Industries. I had accompanied him to client dinners, hosted networking events in our home, provided legal advice during the early expansion. My connections at Peterson, Blake had opened doors that accelerated his company's growth. But according to his lawyers, none of that mattered. What about the apartment? We had lived there for 3 years, had renovated it together, had hosted dozens of events that built his professional network. You'll have 30 days to find alternative housing. I'll cover reasonable moving expenses. Reasonable. The word hung in the air like an insult. And if I contest the divorce terms? Ethan's smile was sharp, predatory. Madison, you're a smart woman. You understand how litigation works. I can afford to drag this out for years while you burn through your savings on legal fees. Or you can accept a generous settlement and move on with your life. Generous. 2 years of minimal alimony and 30 days to find a new place to live after 5 years of marriage. You've thought of everything, I said. I've been planning this for a while. Bree helped me understand that staying in an unhappy marriage wasn't fair to either of us. Bree helped him plan my disposal. The girlfriend was participating in the dismantling of the wife. I'll need time to think about this. Of course. But Madison, I hope you'll consider that fighting this will only make things uglier for both of us. I'd prefer to handle this with dignity. Dignity. The man who had been lying to me for 4 months while planning to divorce me wanted to handle things with dignity. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, to the bed we had shared for 5 years, and sat on the edge while my mind processed everything that had just happened. My marriage was over. My husband loved someone else. I was about to lose my home, my lifestyle, and most of my financial security. But more than that, I was about to lose my identity. For 5 years, I had been Madison Cross, half of a power couple, wife to a successful CEO. Tomorrow, I would be Madison Sterling again, a single woman in her 30s starting over from scratch. I called in sick to work the next morning and spent the day walking through Central Park, trying to understand how my life had imploded so completely. Other couples jogged past me, holding hands and planning their futures together. Dog owners chatted while their pets played, creating the kind of casual intimacy that I had thought I shared with Ethan. But I had been living in an illusion. While I was planning our future, he was planning my exit. That evening, I did something I had never imagined I would do. I called Patricia Hawkins, a private investigator, recommended by a colleague who had gone through a messy divorce the previous year. I need to know everything, I told her during our initial consultation. How long it's really been going on, where they go, what they do, whether she's the only one. I need to understand exactly who I married. Patricia was a former FBI agent with silver hair and the kind of steady presence that made confessing feel safe. Mrs. Cross, are you prepared for what you might find? Sometimes the truth is worse than the suspicion. The truth can't be worse than living in uncertainty. I was wrong about that. The truth was much, much worse. The divorce papers arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by a courier who waited while my assistant signed for them with the kind of professional curiosity that comes from working at a law firm. The entire staff of Peterson, Blake & Associates knew that something was happening in my personal life, but corporate attorneys are trained in discretion. I opened the envelope in my corner office, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas that suddenly felt like props in someone else's life. The documents were professionally prepared, meticulously detailed, and devastating in their completeness. Ethan wasn't just divorcing me, he was systematically erasing me from the life we had built together. The post-nuptial agreement was the first shock. Remember that romantic weekend in the Hamptons during our 3rd year of marriage? The one where we drank too much wine and Ethan surprised me with insurance paperwork that needed my signature? The documents were thick, filled with legal language that I was too intoxicated and in love to read carefully. Those weren't insurance papers. They were a post-nuptial agreement that effectively negated every protection I should have had under New York divorce law. I called Richard Chen, my law school classmate who specialized in family law, and asked him to review the documents. His office overlooked the Hudson River, with a view that normally would have been calming. Today it felt like looking at an execution. Madison, this is bad. Really, really bad. Richard spread the papers across his mahogany conference table with the expression of a doctor delivering terminal diagnosis. You essentially signed away any claim to marital assets acquired during your marriage. That can't be legal. I was intoxicated when I signed it. I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. Proving that in court would be expensive and extremely difficult. Your husband's legal team is already claiming you were perfectly coherent and understood exactly what you were signing. They have photographs from that weekend showing you appearing happy and engaged throughout the entire trip. Of course they did. Ethan had been documenting my consent for years. The prenuptial agreement we had signed before our wedding protected his assets acquired before our marriage, which included the initial investment in Cross Industries. The post-nuptial agreement protected everything he had built afterward, including the apartment, the cars, the investment accounts, and the company's exponential growth. "What am I entitled to?" I asked. Richard's expression was grim. "According to these documents, very little. Basic household items, your personal clothing and jewelry, your individual bank accounts, and 24 months of spousal support calculated at 30% of your final year's salary." 30% of my salary, not his. After 5 years of marriage to a multimillionaire, I would leave with less money than most people earned in a single year. "This is financial abuse," I said. "It's legal financial abuse. Your husband's attorneys are very good at their jobs." The settlement offer arrived 3 days later. A studio apartment in Queens with a lease in my name. Basic furniture from IKEA. A used Honda Civic to replace the BMW I had been driving. 24 months of alimony payments that would barely cover rent and groceries in New York City. After 5 years of marriage, after helping build his empire through networking events and business dinners and legal advice, I would leave with less than Ethan spent on wine in a typical month. But the financial devastation was only the beginning. 2 weeks after the divorce papers were served, Daniel Peterson called me into his corner office. The managing partner who had mentored me for 7 years, who had celebrated my partnership with champagne and promises of a brilliant future, couldn't meet my eyes. "Madison, we need to discuss your position at the firm. Is there a problem with my performance? My billable hours are higher than anyone else in the corporate division." "It's not about performance. It's about conflicts of interest." Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, the same chair where he had offered me partnership 3 years earlier. "Your divorce from Ethan Cross creates potential ethical issues for the firm." "What kind of ethical issues?" "Cross Industries is a significant client for several firms in Manhattan. Their legal work alone generates millions in annual revenue. Some of our existing clients have expressed concerns about confidentiality and potential conflicts if we continue employing you." Translation: Ethan's company was more valuable than my career. "You're firing me because I'm getting divorced?" "We're restructuring the corporate division. Your position is being eliminated as part of broader cost-cutting measures." It was corporate speak for, "Your ex-husband has more influence than you do, and we can't afford to lose his business over your hurt feelings." The severance package was minimal. 2 months' salary and basic health insurance coverage through the end of the year. After 7 years of building my reputation at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms, I was being discarded like a liability. Within 6 weeks of Ethan serving divorce papers, I had lost my husband, my home, my job, and most of my social circle. The friends we had cultivated together chose sides with the inevitability of middle school politics, and they chose the successful CEO over the bitter ex-wife. I moved into a studio apartment in Astoria with a view of a brick wall and kitchen appliances that hadn't been updated since the 1990s. The rent was $800 more per month than my alimony payments. My savings account, once healthy enough to fund European vacations, was drained within 3 months. The job search was humiliating. No major corporate firm would touch me, and smaller practices couldn't afford to pay a salary that would cover my New York City living expenses. I interviewed for positions that paid half my previous income and was told I was overqualified, which seemed to be code for too expensive and too likely to leave for something better. After 4 months of unemployment, I finally found work at Sterling Martinez Associates, a boutique consulting firm in Brooklyn that specialized in helping small businesses navigate corporate legal issues. The commute was 2 hours each way on the subway, but the salary was enough to keep me housed and fed. Susan Martinez was a former prosecutor who had built her practice representing David against various Goliaths in the corporate world. I thought she would understand my situation, sympathize with someone who had been steamrolled by a more powerful opponent. I was wrong. 8 weeks into the job, Susan called me into her cramped office with the kind of expression that meant bad news. "Madison, this isn't working out the way I had hoped." "Is there a problem with my work?" "Client feedback has been excellent." Susan sighed, the sound of someone delivering news she didn't want to give. "Your work is exceptional. That's not the issue." "Then what is the issue?" 3 of our biggest clients have received phone calls in the past month. Anonymous calls questioning your emotional stability, suggesting that you might be a security risk, implying that confidential information might not be safe with you." My blood turned to ice water. Phone calls from whom? I can't prove anything, but the timing is suspicious. These clients had never expressed any concerns about your work until these calls started coming in. And you believe anonymous phone calls over my actual performance? I can't afford to lose these clients, Madison. I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. I sat in Susan's office, staring at this woman who was firing me based on rumors and anonymous phone calls, and realized that Ethan wasn't content with simply divorcing me. He was systematically destroying my ability to rebuild my life. It wasn't enough to take my home, my marriage, and my financial security. He needed to ensure that I couldn't recover, couldn't become independent, couldn't move on without his permission. That night, I sat in my studio apartment, eating ramen noodles and staring at my laptop screen, scrolling through job listings that I knew would disappear the moment any employer called for references. My ex-husband was using his influence to blacklist me from my own industry. But I was about to learn that rock bottom has a basement, and I hadn't hit it yet. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for another job interview that I knew was pointless. The call came at 7:32 in the morning on December 15, exactly 2 months after I had been fired from Sterling Martinez Associates. I was standing in my tiny bathroom, applying concealer under my eyes to hide the evidence of another sleepless night, when my phone rang. Madison, sweetheart. My mother's voice was steady, but I could hear something underneath it that made my hands freeze halfway to my face. Mom, you're up early. Is everything okay? Joan Sterling had raised me alone after my father died of a heart attack when I was 12 years old. She had worked 2 jobs to put me through law school, waitressing at a diner during the day and cleaning offices at night. At 62, she was supposed to be enjoying the comfortable retirement that my success had finally made possible. I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to panic. Those words have never preceded good news in the history of human communication. I've been having some headaches lately, terrible ones that wouldn't go away no matter what I took for them. Yesterday, I finally went to see Dr. Rodriguez, and he sent me for an MRI. My reflection stared back at me from the bathroom mirror, concealer half applied, eyes wide with growing dread. They found something, sweetheart. A tumor. In my brain. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the tile floor of my bathroom. I could hear my mother's voice, tiny and distant, calling my name while I stood frozen in shock. Brain tumor. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. Mom, I'm here. I'm sorry, I dropped the phone. What did the doctor say? It's early stage, which is good news. Dr. Rodriguez thinks it's been growing slowly for months, maybe even a year. That's why the headaches kept getting worse. What kind of treatment do you need? Surgery first, as soon as possible. Then radiation therapy and chemotherapy to make sure they got everything. The prognosis is good if we catch it early, which we have. I sank onto the edge of my bathtub, relief and terror warring in my chest. That's good, Mom. That's really good. When do you start treatment? Next week. But Madison, there's something else we need to discuss. The pause that followed lasted exactly long enough for me to understand that the nightmare was just beginning. The insurance will cover most of the treatment, but not all of it. The surgery alone is going to cost about $75,000 out of pocket. The radiation and chemotherapy will be another $125,000. $200,000. I closed my eyes and tried to do math that I knew wouldn't work. My checking account had $843. My savings account was empty. My credit cards were maxed out from months of unemployment. The oncologist says I can't wait for insurance approvals or payment plans. We need to start treatment immediately. $200,000 to save my mother's life, and I had less than $1,000 to my name. Mom, don't worry about the money. I'll figure it out. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But it was the lie a daughter tells her dying mother. The lie that says everything will be okay, even when the world is ending. After we hung up, I sat on my bathroom floor and cried until I thought I might dehydrate. My mother, the strongest woman I had ever known, was facing the fight of her life while I couldn't even afford groceries. That afternoon, I did something I had sworn I would never do. I called Ethan. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted and slightly annoyed. Madison, what do you want? I thought we agreed to handle all communication through our lawyers. My mother has cancer. Adieu. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other in my desperation to make him understand the urgency. She needs surgery and treatment, and I can't afford it. I know we're divorced. I know things ended badly between us. But you know my mother. She always liked you. She always treated you like family. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough for me to hear traffic in the background, the sounds of a busy life continuing while mine fell apart. I'm sorry to hear that, Madison, but it's not my responsibility anymore. The words were delivered without emotion, like he was declining a dinner invitation. Ethan, please, I'm not asking for charity. I'll sign a promissory note, pay you back with interest. I just need a loan to cover her treatment. His laugh was sharp, cruel. Pay me back with what money? You can't even hold down a job. You're the reason I can't hold down a job. Suck it in. The words exploded out of me, months of frustration and desperation boiling over. You've been sabotaging every opportunity I get, calling my potential employers, poisoning them against me before I even have a chance. That's a very serious accusation, Madison. Do you have any proof of these supposed phone calls? Of course I didn't. He was too smart to leave evidence, too careful to create a paper trail that could be traced back to him. Look, Ethan said, and his voice softened slightly, which somehow made what came next even worse. I genuinely am sorry about your mother's diagnosis. Cancer is terrible, and I hope she recovers completely. But you made your choice when you hired that private investigator and tried to humiliate me during our divorce proceedings. Actions have consequences. He hung up. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop where I had been planning to prepare for another pointless job interview, staring at my phone and trying to process what had just happened. My ex-husband, the man who had once promised to love me in sickness and in health, had just told me that my dying mother wasn't his problem. More than that, he had made it clear that my current situation was punishment for daring to investigate his affair, for refusing to disappear quietly when he decided to upgrade wives. That's when something inside me shifted. The grief and self-pity that had been consuming me for months crystallized into something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. I thought about the woman I used to be before I met Ethan Cross, the attorney who had never lost a case in 7 years of practice, the negotiator who could talk Fortune 500 CEOs into settlements they had sworn they would never accept, the woman who had fought her way from a working-class neighborhood in Queens to a corner office in Manhattan through sheer determination and refusal to accept defeat. That woman wouldn't sit in a parking lot crying about her problems. She would find a solution, even if that solution required her to become someone she had never been before. I started the car and drove home, my mind racing through possibilities. If Ethan wanted war, I would give him war. But I wouldn't fight fair, because fair fighting was for people who still believed in justice, in rules, and basic human decency. Ethan Cross had taught me that none of those things mattered. Only power mattered. Only winning mattered. And I was about to learn how to win. The therapist's office was nothing like what I had expected. Dr. Sarah Chen had decorated it like a living room, with overstuffed armchairs and soft lighting that made confession feel safe. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with psychology texts and novels that suggested she understood both the clinical and human sides of crisis. Tell me about the woman you were before you met Ethan, she said during our first session. I thought about the question for a long time, trying to excavate a version of myself that felt like archaeology. Competitive, I said finally, ruthlessly competitive. I was the kid who studied harder than everyone else because I had to. My mom worked 16-hour days to keep us afloat after my dad died. Failure wasn't an option because failure meant disappointing the person who had sacrificed everything for my success. And in your career? I prepared for cases like I was going to war. I researched opposing counsel until I knew their weaknesses better than they did. I won because I was willing to work harder, dig deeper, and fight longer than anyone else in the room. Sarah nodded, making notes in the legal pad that never left her lap. So what happened to that woman? The question hit like a physical blow. I felt tears starting behind my eyes, the familiar burn of shame and regret. Ethan convinced me she was too much, too aggressive, too intimidating, too competitive. He said successful men wanted wives, not rivals. He said my intensity made him feel like he was failing as a husband. And you believed him? I had. For 5 years, I had systematically dismantled every quality that had made me successful. I had turned my greatest strengths into sources of shame, my natural instincts into character flaws that needed correction. I want her back, I whispered. Then let's find her. The process of excavating my former self was brutal. Sarah guided me through exercises that forced me to confront how completely I had lost myself, how thoroughly I had been convinced that my natural personality was a problem to be solved rather than a strength to be celebrated. But slowly, session by session, she began to emerge. The attorney who had never lost a case started researching Ethan's business with the same intensity she had once brought to corporate mergers. I studied cross-industries like I was preparing for the trial of my life, because in many ways I was. What I discovered was fascinating. Ethan's company had grown rapidly, but that growth was entirely dependent on partnerships with larger firms. Cross Industries was essentially a middle management company, taking data analytics projects from major corporations and farming them out to smaller specialist firms. Ethan's role was primarily networking and relationship management. His biggest potential deal was a partnership with Blackwood Ventures, a massive investment firm run by billionaire James Blackwood. This partnership would provide Cross Industries with the capital and connections necessary to compete with Silicon Valley giants. Without this deal, Ethan's company would remain successful, but ultimately limited to regional clients. James Blackwood became my obsession. 41 years old, self-made billionaire who had built his fortune through tech startups and real estate investments. Divorced 3 years earlier, no children, known for his philanthropy and his absolutely ruthless business practices. He had a reputation for cutting ties with anyone who proved dishonest or unethical, and his due diligence process was legendary in its thoroughness. More importantly, he valued authenticity above everything else. He had built his empire on partnerships with innovative, honest leaders who shared his vision for ethical business practices. An idea began forming in my mind. It was audacious, possibly illegal, and definitely risky. But it was also exactly the kind of strategy the old Madison would have executed flawlessly. I was going to insert myself into Ethan's biggest business deal. First, I needed credibility. I couldn't approach James Blackwood as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. I needed to be Madison Sterling, business consultant and corporate strategist. I used my last functional credit card to rent a small office space in Manhattan and registered Sterling Consulting LLC. The website I created showcased my corporate law background, positioning myself as a specialist in tech startup partnerships and corporate due diligence. It wasn't entirely fiction. I did understand corporate law better than most consultants, and I had worked on several major tech mergers during my time at Peterson, Blake & Associates. Next, I researched James Blackwood's current investment portfolio, looking for companies that might need the kind of legal consulting that would give me credibility in his circles. I found 3 startups in his portfolio that were preparing for initial public offerings, exactly the kind of companies that needed experienced legal guidance during the transition. I spent 2 weeks crafting the perfect pitch, then sent carefully worded emails to all 3 companies. 2 ignored me completely, but the third responded with interest. PayForward was a fintech startup founded by a 28-year-old Stanford graduate named Marcus Webb. The company had developed an innovative payment processing system that was attracting attention from major banks, but Marcus was completely overwhelmed by the legal complexities of going public. "Ms. Sterling," he said during our initial meeting in his cramped Midtown office, "you seem incredibly overqualified for what we can afford to pay." "I'm not interested in your money right now," I replied, leaning forward with the kind of intensity that had once made opposing counsel nervous. "I'm interested in building relationships with companies that are going to change the world. PayForward has that potential. I want to be part of your success story." It was a calculated risk, working essentially for free. But I needed credibility more than immediate income, and Marcus Webb was my entry point into James Blackwood's world. 3 weeks later, my gamble paid off. "Madison," Marcus called me on a Thursday afternoon, excitement clear in his voice. "James Blackwood wants to meet with you. He's been reviewing our IPO preparation materials, and apparently he's impressed with your work. He's considering hiring you for a larger project." My heart rate doubled. "What kind of project?" "He's evaluating several potential partnerships for Blackwood Ventures. He wants someone with your background to assess the legal and ethical implications of working with these companies." I almost laughed out loud. James Blackwood was about to hire me to evaluate companies that would almost certainly include Cross Industries. I was about to get a front row seat to my ex-husband's most important business deal, and Ethan would never see it coming. The Blackwood Ventures headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, with views that stretched from the Hudson River to Brooklyn Bridge. The lobby was elegant without being ostentatious, filled with contemporary art and the kind of quiet efficiency that whispered serious money. I arrived 20 minutes early, wearing my best remaining suit and carrying a briefcase filled with research I had compiled on James Blackwood's business philosophy and investment history. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing fast enough to power a small city. This was my one shot. If I could impress James Blackwood, I might actually have a chance at taking down Ethan. If I failed, I would be back to my studio apartment in Queens with no money, no prospects, and a dying mother I couldn't help. Ms. Sterling? The receptionist was young, polished, and possessed the kind of understated authority that could intimidate Fortune 500 CEOs with a single glance. Mr. Blackwood will see you now. The elevator to the 38th floor was silent except for the sound of my heart trying to escape through my throat. When the doors opened, I stepped into an office that managed to be impressive without crossing into vulgar display. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of Manhattan. The desk was massive but uncluttered, clearly expensive but not showy. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with what appeared to be actual books rather than decorative props. James Blackwood stood as I entered, and I was immediately struck by how different he was from Ethan. Tall, yes, but without the practiced charm that felt like performance. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, his smile genuine rather than calculated. Ms. Sterling, thank you for coming. Marcus Webb speaks very highly of your work with PayForward. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Blackwood. I understand you're evaluating potential partnerships for Blackwood Ventures? He gestured toward a seating area away from his desk, two leather chairs facing each other across a low table. More intimate than a formal business meeting, but not quite casual. I am, and I'll be completely honest with you about what I need. James settled into his chair with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to be in any room. I require someone with your legal background to help me separate legitimate opportunities from companies that look good on paper but have underlying problems. What kind of problems concern you most? James leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made me understand how he had built a billion-dollar empire before turning 45. Ethical issues primarily, financial irregularities, leadership problems, toxic corporate culture. I've learned that no amount of potential profit is worth partnering with people who don't share my values. It was exactly the opening I had been hoping for. That's incredibly smart, I said, allowing my natural intensity to show. Corporate culture problems can destroy even the most profitable partnerships. In my experience, the biggest red flags are leaders who treat employees as disposable resources, who engage in personal conduct that reflects poorly on their business judgment, or who aren't completely transparent about potential conflicts of interest. Something flickered in James's eyes, a sharpening of attention that suggested I had hit a nerve. Interesting. Can you give me a specific example? The question felt like a test, and I had been preparing for this exam my entire adult life. Well, hypothetically, if a CEO was conducting an extramarital affair with a direct subordinate, that would raise serious questions about judgment, workplace harassment policies, and whether personal decisions might compromise business relationships. James nodded slowly, his expression giving nothing away. And if that CEO was using company resources to fund the affair? My pulse quickened. We were dancing around something specific now, and I sensed he was testing my ability to recognize exactly the kind of ethical problems he was concerned about. That would constitute embezzlement, regardless of the amounts involved. Even small misappropriations demonstrate a pattern of using corporate assets for personal gain. Investors should be extremely concerned about what other boundaries might be crossed. And if that same CEO was using his business influence to damage a former partner's career out of personal spite? Now I was certain we weren't speaking hypothetically. James Blackwood knew something about Ethan Cross, and he was evaluating whether I was smart enough to recognize the same red flags. That would suggest someone who prioritizes personal vendettas over sound business judgment, the kind of person who might sabotage profitable partnerships if they felt personally slighted or threatened. James was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes never leaving my face. I could practically see him calculating, weighing risks and opportunities with a speed that had made him billions. Ms. Sterling, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to give me a completely honest answer. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Do you have any personal connection to Cross Industries or its CEO, Ethan Cross? My mouth went dry. This was the moment of truth, the choice between maintaining my cover and gambling everything on honesty. I thought about my mother, dying while I struggled to afford her treatment. I thought about Ethan, probably planning his next move to destroy what remained of my career. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who never backed down from a fight even when the odds were impossible. Yes, I said quietly. Ethan Cross is my ex-husband. James's expression didn't change, but I saw his shoulders tense slightly, the almost imperceptible shift of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew. I see. And you're here because? Because I know him better than anyone else you could possibly consult. And if you're considering a partnership with Cross Industries, you need to understand exactly what kind of man you would be doing business with. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Finally, James leaned forward in his chair, his elbows on his knees, his attention focused entirely on me. Tell me, he said simply. So I did. I told him about the systematic affair, about the carefully planned divorce that stripped me of everything I had helped build. I told him about the campaign to destroy my career, about the anonymous phone calls to potential employers, about my mother's cancer and Ethan's cruel refusal to help. When I finished, James was quiet for a long time, his fingers steepled in front of his face. You realize this could sound like the revenge fantasy of a bitter ex-wife, he said finally. Yes, but it's also completely true, and I can prove most of it. Why should I trust you? I met his eyes directly, letting him see the determination that had carried me from Queens to Manhattan, from waiting tables to corner offices, from broken victim to dangerous woman. Because I'm risking absolutely everything by being here. If you tell Ethan about this conversation, he will destroy what's left of my life. I'm here because my mother's dying, and I can't save her with the resources I currently have. But I'm also here because Ethan Cross is exactly the kind of unethical partner you said you refused to work with. James stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city that had made both our fortunes and broken both our hearts in different ways. What do you want from me, Madison? A chance to prove I'm right. Let me conduct the due diligence on Cross Industries that you would perform on any other potential partner. If I'm wrong about Ethan's character, you can walk away knowing you made the right decision. If I'm right, you'll avoid a partnership that could seriously damage your reputation. He turned back to me, and something in his expression had shifted. And what do you get out of this arrangement? A chance to rebuild my career working with someone who values integrity. And maybe, if I can document Ethan's financial improprieties, a way to help save my mother's life. James studied me for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. All right, Madison Sterling, you have 2 weeks to prove your case. But I warn you, if you're lying to me, if this is some elaborate scheme for personal revenge, I will ensure you never work in this industry again. I stood and extended my hand across the space between us. Deal. As we shook hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, genuine hope that I might actually be able to save my mother and reclaim my life. But I also felt something else. Something more dangerous. James Blackwood was attractive in a way that had nothing to do with his money and everything to do with his integrity. He was the kind of man who could make me forget why I was here, what I was fighting for. I couldn't afford that kind of distraction, not when I was finally close to getting my life back. 2 weeks became a month as I dove deeper into Cross Industries than I had ever explored during my marriage. What I discovered was worse than I had imagined, and I had imagined some pretty terrible things. Ethan hadn't just been careless with company funds. He had been systematically embezzling money for over 3 years, funding his lifestyle and his affair with corporate resources while his investors and employees remained ignorant of the theft. The amounts weren't large enough to trigger automatic audits, but the pattern was undeniable. Hotel suites charged to the corporate card for romantic weekends with Bree. Designer jewelry purchased through the company accounts as gifts for his mistress. A BMW lease paid for with Cross Industries money but registered in Bree's name. Even more damaging was the spa weekend in the Hamptons that was supposedly a corporate retreat for senior staff. According to the expense reports, 12 executives attended this strategic planning session. According to the hotel records I managed to obtain, only 2 people stayed in the presidential suite that weekend. Ethan Cross and Bree Collins. The paper trail was extensive once you knew where to look. Credit card statements, travel receipts, expense reports that didn't match actual business activities. Ethan had been treating Cross Industries like his personal bank account, confident that his charm and success would prevent anyone from questioning his expenditures. But the financial improprieties were only part of the story. I found evidence of the systematic campaign to destroy my career, email communications between Ethan and several law firms that were careful never to explicitly state that I shouldn't be hired, but managed to plant enough doubt to ensure that doors remain closed. I'm concerned about Madison's emotional stability following our divorce. Read one email to a managing partner at a firm where I had interviewed. She's been making some fairly serious accusations about my business practices. I worry that her judgment might be compromised by personal animosity. Another email, sent to a boutique consulting firm. Madison is brilliant, but she can be intense. Some clients might find her approach too aggressive. I'd hate to see her damage relationships that took years to build. He never directly told anyone not to hire me. He was too smart for that. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt, subtle suggestions that I might be unstable, unreliable, or professionally dangerous. The accusations were vague enough to be legally defensible, but specific enough to make hiring managers nervous. The final piece of evidence came from Patricia Hawkins, the private investigator I had hired during the divorce. She called me on a Tuesday evening while I was compiling my research in James's conference room. Madison, I kept investigating after your divorce was finalized. Call it professional curiosity, but I found something that changes everything. We met the next morning at a coffee shop near my apartment. Patricia spread several photographs across our small table, her expression grimmer than I had ever seen it. "They've been trying to have a baby," she said without preamble. The photographs showed Ethan and Bree entering and leaving a fertility clinic in Manhattan's Upper East Side. The timestamps indicated they had been patients there for nearly 8 months. "Bree has been undergoing in vitro fertilization treatments," Patricia continued. "Hormone injections, egg retrieval procedures, embryo transfers, the whole process." My stomach clenched, not from jealousy but from understanding the legal implications. "Patricia, please tell me you have documentation of how these treatments are being paid for." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "Every single appointment, every medication, every procedure, all paid for with Cross Industries corporate credit cards." I sat back in my chair, my mind racing through the ramifications. If Bree gets pregnant while she's his subordinate employee, and if he's been using company money to pay for fertility treatments, it's a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen, Patricia finished. Any competent attorney could argue that her career advancement was directly tied to her sexual relationship with the CEO. The company's insurance won't cover that kind of liability because it results from illegal conduct. It was the smoking gun I needed. Clear evidence of financial impropriety, abuse of power, and a potential legal catastrophe that could destroy Cross Industries' reputation and eliminate any possibility of partnership with Blackwood Ventures. That evening, I sat in James's office as he reviewed the evidence I had compiled over the past month. The Manhattan skyline glittered outside his windows while he read through financial records, email communications, and private investigator reports with the methodical attention of someone who had built an empire by never missing important details. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, setting down the last folder, "and absolutely damning. But Madison, some of this information was obtained through questionable means. The medical records, the private financial documents, the email communications. All of it was obtained legally," I replied. "Patricia has contacts throughout the city who provide information that's technically public record, but requires knowing where to look. The financial records came from sources who have legitimate access to Cross Industries accounts." James leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Over the past month, our professional relationship had developed layers of complexity that neither of us had anticipated. Not romance exactly, but a mutual respect and attraction that felt increasingly difficult to ignore. "What do you want me to do with this information?" he asked. "What you would do with any potential business partner who posed this level of risk. Walk away from the deal completely." And then I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would determine everything that happened afterward. "I want to expose him publicly, not out of spite or personal revenge, but because Cross Industries employees deserve to know what kind of man they're working for. Because investors deserve to understand where their money is actually going. Because other women deserve to know what happens when you cross someone with Ethan's level of power and vindictiveness." James stood and walked to his window. A gesture I had learned meant he was processing complex information and calculating multiple scenarios. "You realize this will destroy him completely," he said without turning around. "Yes, and it might destroy you as well. Going after a powerful man like this, even with substantial evidence, is extremely dangerous. He will fight back with every resource at his disposal. Let him fight. I'm not the broken woman he divorced 18 months ago. James turned to face me, and something in his expression made my breath catch in my throat. No, he said quietly. You're definitely not. The moment stretched between us, charged with possibility and attraction that we had both been trying to ignore. Then James's phone buzzed with a text message, breaking the spell. The Cross Industries annual gala is tomorrow night, he said, reading the message. Ethan has been trying to get me to attend for months, supposedly to discuss our potential partnership. I think it's time I made an appearance. My heart started racing. James, if you show up there, especially with a date, Ethan will know something is wrong. He'll be suspicious. A slow, dangerous smile spread across James's face. I wasn't planning to go alone. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that tomorrow night, Ethan Cross gets to see exactly what he threw away, and then he gets to watch while it destroys everything he thinks he owns. I stared at James, understanding exactly what he was proposing. Walking into that gala would mean entering the lion's den, facing Ethan on his home turf while surrounded by his allies and supporters, but it would also be the perfect stage for his complete and total downfall. Are you absolutely certain about this? I asked. James moved closer, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, smell the subtle cologne that somehow made me think of confidence and integrity. Madison, I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom looked exactly like it had in my fevered dreams for the past month. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over 600 of Manhattan's most powerful people. The cream of New York society mingling with tech moguls, venture capitalists, and political figures whose decisions shape the city's economic future. I stood at the entrance in an emerald silk gown that had cost more than my monthly rent, James's hand steady and reassuring on my arm. The dress had been his suggestion, chosen to complement the diamond necklace he had insisted I borrow from his personal collection. My auburn hair cascaded in carefully styled waves down my back, and my makeup was flawless enough for magazine covers. This was it. The moment I had been planning, dreaming about, and dreading for months. The night when Madison Sterling would either reclaim her place in the world or be destroyed completely in the attempt. The reaction was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence throughout the ballroom. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, creating a strobe effect that turned our entrance into a Hollywood premiere. Every head in the room swiveled toward the doorway, toward James Blackwood and his mysterious, stunning companion. Toward me. I saw Ethan before he saw me. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by investors and admirers, looking every inch the successful CEO in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. Bree clung to his arm in a red dress that was beautiful, but tried too hard to compete with women who had decades more experience navigating high society events. Ethan looked confident, relaxed, completely in control of his kingdom. This was his night, his celebration, his chance to cement the partnerships that would elevate Cross Industries from regional success to national powerhouse. Then he saw me. The color drained from his face so quickly that I thought he might faint. His practiced smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. The champagne glass in his hand began trembling visibly as recognition and shock and something that looked like terror washed over his features. Bree followed his gaze, her own expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something approaching panic as she realized that the woman everyone was staring at was her lover's ex-wife. James squeezed my arm gently. Ready to make history? I've been ready for this moment my entire life. We walked into the ballroom together, and I felt the power dynamics shift in real time. Conversations that had been centered around Ethan suddenly redirected toward us. Investors who had been fawning over Cross Industries' CEO began gravitating toward James with the magnetic pull that billions of dollars exert in social situations. The spotlight that had been focused on Ethan's success story shifted to encompass the woman he had discarded and the billionaire who had claimed her. But this wasn't about being arm candy for another powerful man. This was about reclaiming my place in a world that had tried to erase me, proving that Madison Sterling was not a victim to be pitied, but a force to be reckoned with. Madison Sterling, I heard someone whisper near the silent auction tables. Isn't that Ethan Cross's ex-wife? What is she doing here with James Blackwood? Look at her. She's absolutely stunning. For the first time in over a year, people were talking about me not with pity or dismissal, but with curiosity, interest, and something that might have been envy. I was visible again, not as an appendage to someone else's success, but as an independent force worthy of attention. Ethan approached us near the champagne fountain, Bree trailing behind him like a reluctant shadow. His recovery was impressive, I had to give him credit. The shock had been replaced by his trademark charm, though I could see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to understand what game we were playing. "James," he said, extending his hand with practiced warmth, "I'm so glad you could make it tonight. This is exactly the kind of conversation I've been hoping we could have." "Ethan." James's handshake was brief, professional, nothing more. "Thank you for the invitation. I'd like you to meet my business partner, Madison Sterling." The words business partner hit Ethan like a physical blow. I watched him process the implications, his mind racing through possibilities and trying to calculate angles he couldn't see. "Madison," he said carefully, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp with suspicion. "You look, well." "I am well, Ethan. Better than I've been in years, actually." Bree stepped forward with a smile that looked like it was carved from ice. "I'm Bree Collins, Ethan's partner at Cross Industries." The pause before partner was telling. Even she wasn't entirely sure how to define their relationship in public. "How nice to meet you," I replied with perfect politeness. "James, didn't you mention that Cross Industries was one of the companies you were evaluating for potential partnership?" James's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Actually, Madison, after reviewing our due diligence materials, I've decided to pass on that opportunity." The words landed like bombs in the small circle around us. Nearby conversations faltered as people strained to hear what was clearly an important business discussion. Ethan's face went pale again. "Pass? James, I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding. Cross Industries is exactly the type of innovative, ethical company that aligns perfectly with Blackwood Ventures' investment philosophy." "I'm sure it is," James replied calmly. "But I've learned some concerning information about Cross Industries' leadership practices and financial management. I can't in good conscience move forward with a partnership." The blood drained from Ethan's face completely now. Around us I could see smartphones appearing as people began recording or texting frantically. This conversation would be all over social media within minutes. "What kind of concerning information?" Ethan asked, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. James glanced at me, then back at Ethan. "The kind that makes me question whether Cross Industries leadership maintains the ethical standards I require in business partnerships." Ethan's legendary control finally began to crack. "This is about her, isn't it?" He pointed at me, his voice rising above the diplomatic whisper appropriate for gala conversations. "She's poisoned you against me with lies and accusations? Whatever Madison has told you, she's lying. She's bitter about our divorce and can't stand that I've moved on and built something successful without her." The ballroom had gone almost completely quiet now. 500 of Manhattan's most powerful people were watching as Ethan Cross unraveled in public, his carefully constructed image cracking under pressure. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "this is about you using company funds to pay for your mistress's fertility treatments. About you systematically sabotaging my career after our divorce to ensure I couldn't rebuild my life. About you embezzling nearly $200,000 over 3 years to fund your extramarital affair." Gas rippled through the crowd like waves. Camera flashes erupted as journalists and socialites captured every moment of what was clearly going to be the scandal of the year. Reporters pushed closer, sensing blood in the water. Ethan opened his mouth to deny everything, but James smoothly withdrew a leather folder from inside his tuxedo jacket. "We have comprehensive documentation," James said, his voice calm but carrying enough authority to command attention from every corner of the ballroom. "Hotel receipts, credit card statements, medical billing records, email communications. All of it meticulously verified and legally obtained." Bree made a small sound of distress and stepped away from Ethan, her survival instincts finally overriding her romantic delusions. Smart woman. She could sense which way the wind was blowing and wanted to distance herself before the hurricane made landfall. Ethan looked around the ballroom desperately, seeing his empire crumbling in real time. Board members were whispering frantically among themselves. Investors were backing away as if his scandals might be contagious. His carefully constructed network of power and influence was dissolving before his eyes. "You'll never prove any of this in court," he said desperately, his voice cracking with strain. It's all speculation and circumstantial evidence assembled by a vindictive ex-wife. The Securities and Exchange Commission might disagree, I replied calmly. I filed a formal complaint this morning, along with all supporting documentation. I also initiated a sexual harassment lawsuit on behalf of Ms. Collins and any other female employees whose career advancement was tied to providing sexual favors to their supervisor. Bree's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't known about the lawsuit, but she was intelligent enough to realize that I had just thrown her a legal lifeline that could protect her from the fallout. Ethan's face twisted with pure rage. You vindictive bitch! I should have destroyed you completely when I had the chance, instead of being generous with the divorce settlement. The words hung in the poison air like an admission of guilt. Around us, smartphones captured every moment of his complete meltdown, ensuring that his tantrum would be preserved for posterity and shared across every social media platform in existence. James stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet but carrying the kind of authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. I think you should leave now, Ethan. Security is already moving in your direction, and anything else you say will only make tomorrow's headlines worse. Hotel security was indeed approaching, alerted by the commotion and the obvious distress of their high-profile guests. Ethan looked around wildly, seeing his kingdom crumbling, his reputation destroyed, his future imploding in spectacular fashion. "This isn't over," he snarled at me, his composure completely shattered. "Yes," I said with perfect calm, "it is." As security escorted Ethan from his own gala, the ballroom erupted in conversation. Reporters surrounded me with questions, cameras flashed continuously, and investors lined up to meet the woman who had just brought down one of Manhattan's most seemingly successful CEOs. But I only had eyes for James, who was looking at me with something that might have been admiration mixed with attraction and respect. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly, leaning close enough that his words were meant for me alone. I thought about the question seriously. How did I feel? Not triumphant exactly, not vindictive or cruel, just complete. "Like myself again," I said. "For the first time in years, I feel like Madison Sterling." 6 months later, I stood in the observation lounge of Mount Sinai Hospital, watching my mother sleep peacefully in her private room. The surgery had been completely successful. The radiation and chemotherapy had eliminated every trace of cancer from her system. Her prognosis was excellent, and she was already making plans to return to her volunteer work at the community center. The medical bills had been covered entirely by the settlement from Cross Industries, along with enough additional compensation to ensure my mother's comfortable retirement and my own financial independence. Sterling Consulting had grown into a legitimate business with clients throughout Manhattan and a reputation for ethical practices and thorough due diligence. James appeared beside me carrying 2 cups of coffee, the kind of thoughtful gesture that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. "How is she today?" he asked, handing me the coffee that was exactly how I liked it. "Strong, stubborn, and determined to be discharged 3 days ahead of schedule, even though her doctors want her to rest for another week," I replied with a smile. "I wonder where she gets those qualities." James and I had been together for 5 months now, building something real and substantial instead of rushing into a relationship based on shared trauma and mutual attraction. We had both learned the importance of taking time to understand each other's values, goals, and boundaries. "Any regrets about how everything played out?" he asked. I thought about Ethan, who had fled to Switzerland after the SEC investigation resulted in criminal charges and civil penalties that bankrupted Cross Industries. About Bree, who had taken her settlement money and moved to California to start a nonprofit organization, helping women navigate workplace harassment. About the woman I had been 2 years earlier, broken and convinced that she was powerless to change her circumstances. "None," I said firmly. "I learned something crucial through all of this." "What's that?" "That sometimes you have to lose everything to discover who you really are. And sometimes the person you become is infinitely stronger than the person you were before." James smiled and took my hand, the gesture easy and natural after months of building trust and intimacy. "To second chances," he said, raising his coffee cup. "To becoming exactly who we're meant to be," I corrected. As we stood there watching my mother recover, watching the sun set over the city where I had lost everything and found myself again, I realized this wasn't really an ending at all. It was the beginning of Madison Sterling's real story. The one where she was the hero, not the victim. The one where she saved herself and built something better than what she had lost. The one where she lived powerfully, authentically, and unapologetically ever after. Because sometimes the most beautiful revenge is living well, loving deeply, and refusing to let anyone else define your worth. And sometimes the woman who emerges from the ashes is worth more than everything that burned. If Madison's transformation from victim to victor moved you, if her story of rising from rock bottom to reclaim her power resonated with something deep inside, don't keep this inspiration to yourself. Hit that like button to let me know this story touched your heart. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment made you cheer for Madison the loudest. Was it when she walked into that gala, when she exposed Ethan's crimes, or when she finally said, "I feel like myself again"? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they're never truly powerless, that sometimes losing everything is the beginning of finding your real strength. And if you want more stories like this, stories about people who refuse to stay broken, who turn their darkest moments into their greatest triumphs, subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. Because Madison Sterling's story is just the beginning. There are so many more incredible journeys of resilience, revenge, and redemption waiting for you. Remember, you are never powerless. You are always becoming who you're meant to be. I'll see you in the next story.